So in that moment when we're evaluating whether to buy a particular product or service, we are all so practiced at asking ourselves, like, does this product or service meet my needs and expectations? Is it convenient for me to buy this product or service? And, does this price match what I'm willing to pay for this product or service, right? Like, we do that stuff in our sleep, right? Thank you, capitalism. What I want to suggest to you is that Hi, friends, and welcome to this episode of the New Humans for New Earth podcast. I'm Queenie, your host, and on this podcast, we discuss the great transition into New Earth that we are all living through today. Here, we introduce you to wisdom, perspectives, and information to support and inspire you in making more aligned choices in your life. We're here to co-create New Earth, so let's talk about it. Before we dive into this episode, thank you for taking a moment to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. In this moment of great transition, messages of hope, love, kindness, compassion, and unity, and stories about people who are helping to build a better future are so important. Hitting subscribe is a free and easy way to help this podcast reach others like you who are here to help co-create New Earth. From my heart to yours, thank you. One of the things that is really sort of characterizing this moment, I think, is this concept of disclosure. And maybe sort of more broadly than that, sort of this growing sort of collective awareness about some of the things that have been, for instance, being applied to our food. Some of the ways that, various corporations have been engaging with our natural environment, right? An example of this is like throwing out used inventory rather than putting it back into their stock because it's easier and cheaper to do that, right? And just adding to our landfills. I think as well, right? And something that we're becoming aware of is just how much sort of this seeming plethora of different brands are actually all held by an increasingly or decreasingly small number of mega corporations, right? And so buying these brands actually is just helping bolster the continued sort of concentration of wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands. And so along with all of this, there's this sort of growing conversation around our consumer choices and the companies and the people and the brands that we're choosing to support with our dollars. There's so much going on right now, right? I mean, whether that be sort of your own awakening process, whether that be, the healing work with yourself or with you and whichever of your loved ones, right? Whether it be trying to figure out how to restructure your life in a way that feels good for you and that works for you, that this question of gosh, do I really need to add on this additional layer of asking myself whether I should be buying this brand of chips, and when we're faced with sort of all of these different questions, right, all these different projects, there's this inclination to sort of say what does it matter, right? I'm just one drop in the ocean. What does it really matter whether I buy this chip brand or I buy my laundry detergent from this online retailer, right? It's just a drop in the bucket. And there's just this deep-seated sort of what I do doesn't make a difference. But it does. And you may be one drop, but together we are the ocean, right? Together we make billionaires. And that happens through sort of all these little choices that we make day to day in the marketplace, quote unquote. And I know you've heard all this before because there's a lot of conversation around it right now. But I wanted to take today's episode to talk about the reason why our consumer choices matter that no one is talking about. So this reality that we live in, it's all energy, all of it, and I know that sort of thinking about it that literally might feel a little counterintuitive, right? I mean, let's remember that we are sort of emerging from a purely materialistic worldview, according to which the only thing that there is matter, and that there is nothing beyond that, right? But, this idea that everything is actually energy is starting to gain a lot of traction, including in the sciences. And, you can kind of see this as well in the mainstream day-to-day conversation, right? Like everyone talks about energy and vibration or vibes these days, right? And, for me, one of the signs that like an idea has like really taken hold in sort of the collective consciousness, if you will, is when it starts showing up in advertising for major corporations. When the when the big players, if you will, in sort of the marketplace start kind of like trying to buy into or co-opt a certain concept, like that's when that it's really taken hold. Maybe like you haven't noticed this yet, but like I guarantee you at the end, like after listening to this episode, like you will start to see this. I've had conversations with people where they're like, that was totally made up, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was just like, they were just using it, whatever concept it is. They were just co-opting that concept, to manipulate the masses. In this case, in the case of that conversation, it was Jesus, right? This person was like a Jesus skeptic. And we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But what I said to them was I was like, look, like, you don't co-opt something if there's nothing to co-opt. Right? If there isn't sort of a natural inherent power in that concept, in that being, there's nothing to co-opt. So like, it's not even worth the effort. And so this conversation around energy, this conversation about vibes, vibe checking, energy vampires, right? Like, it's so pervasive and it is being co-opted and all of that because it's speaking into a deep truth, which is coming to be so sort of intuitively and even experientially obvious to us that, for instance, in the case of the major corporations that are using this now in their advertising, they're like, we can't not be part of that conversation. We can't act like that's not part of the reality now, but we can use it to make people think that we're kind of in on the secret, and use it to try to sell them some products. So, like I said, I think that this concept is becoming like very obvious to people now. But let's be real, like this concept was not part of the general conversation like 20, 30 years ago, right? And for me, that's actually a sign of, this acceleration of human evolution, this reawakening process that we're all going through. And even though, the concept of energy, like, wasn't really something that we had space for when we were like so enmeshed in the materialistic worldview, there has nonetheless always, always, always been people who have been tapped into this, who have been able to either sense or perceive energy, right? And, in prior sort of moments in time, we might have referred to these people as like psychic or, as like having supernatural powers. I think now, sort of like recent generations, that we actually have more and more people who just have that sensitivity where experiencing or perceiving energy is just like part of their, honestly, just like felt experience of this reality. And one thing that's coming to mind is like empaths. I don't think that it is a mistake or a coincidence that there are so many people who self-identify as empaths on the planet right now. I actually think that that is like part of this collective awakening experience, right? Is that we now have more and more people on this planet who are like, I sense this, I feel this. Oh, you do too? Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. And it's part of that, like getting more people on in this dimension, on this plane to kind of like hold that perception of reality for the collective so that it like starts to permeate the like collective consciousness about how this world operates. Right? It's almost like they're helping to like inject and hold this perception and the sensitivity for the collective. And that's exactly what you're seeing, right? Is now it's part of the collective conversation to the extent that it is now being co-opted and put in advertising, right? Like that is how mainstream this concept has gotten. So, maybe I'm saying something that sounds totally obvious to you. But like if you're sort of in some of the earlier stages of your awakening process, like welcome to the party, And I'll just say like, if this sort of aspect of reality or aspect of like this experience of this reality like isn't quite resonating with you or feels counterintuitive or you're like if you just feel still a little skeptical about it, I mean, like, let's just talk about the fact that, like, most of what we call matter is just empty space. I mean, it's very similar concept. I mean, if you look at the structure of atoms, mostly empty space with like just the teeny tiniest little bit of charged particles in it. Right? And then again, we're coming back into energy. I guess that's just to say, like, if your sort of rational mind kind of rejects this kind of conversation, like, know that it is supported by science as well. Anyways, long story short, everything's energy, all right? Okay, so a concept that is like closely related to the concept of energy is the idea of energy transfer. Right. And again, I think this concept is kind of becoming more and more mainstream. Like I think we've all heard about energy vampires at this point, right? I mean, and if you somehow haven't, right? Like I think we've all had that experience of engaging with a person and leaving that interaction and being like, "Oh my God, I am so exhausted now." Or I feel so depleted as a result of that interaction. Or or I mean, it doesn't even have to be that extreme, right? It could be, I feel foggy now. I'm not sure why. I actually like don't believe that all or even most people that we would describe as like energy vampires are like doing it intentionally. I actually think that like a lot of well I have some complicated thoughts around this, but I mean, it's like there are some people that we would characterize as energy vampires who are that way because they're not just okay in themselves, right? Like they need someone else to be fixated on them and interacting with them and paying them attention because they're just not settled and okay in themselves. And so it's almost like they don't feel okay in their own existence unless someone else is like observing and validating them. And so, I mean, maybe this rings true for you, right? Like you've had an interaction with someone where you're like done. You're ready to be done with this conversation or whatever. But like they just keep extending it. It's like you think that there's going to be a moment where you can kind of smoothly and politely kind of end the interaction, but once they finish that one story, somehow it morphs into another story. and there isn't that like break for you to either contribute to the conversation or to like cut it off. It all just comes back to like whether or not a person really loves themselves, honestly. So there's that kind of energy vampire, right? But then I think a lot of it is more like your energy fields just don't gel together, right? Like for instance, I had a hairdresser once that I went and saw maybe 3 times. And every single time I would leave and I would just like I would have to go take a nap afterwards. I'd feel weak and tired and foggy, like almost like I couldn't even see straight afterwards. And she was a perfectly nice person, like there was nothing strange about the conversation or anything like that. It was just there was something about the way that our energy fields interacted where I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. I just cannot let this person into my energy field, touch my hair and my head, and, put myself through having to engage with her anymore. And it wasn't a judgment thing. I didn't think she was a bad person. I didn't think that there was anything about her specifically, right? Like I would not have put her in the category of someone who just wasn't loving herself. I mean, maybe if I got to know her better, I would have gone there, but that wasn't my read on it. It was just there was something weird about how our energies interacted. And so I went and found a different hairdresser. you know. But then there are people who for sure are doing this intentionally. An example that's sort of coming up for me, and I hesitate to share this a little bit because I don't want to kind of play into some people's sort of prejudices around like Indigenous folks. So let me just preface this by saying like I do not know who this person was. I'm just going to describe the way that they were dressed and appeared to me. But so I was in Sayulita, Mexico, with some friends a few years ago. We were sitting out at like a restaurant, eating a meal or something outside on like the main street. And I felt this presence come by. And like, I mean, the energy of it almost felt like what I would imagine like a black hole to feel like. It was like strong gravity, vacuumy kind of energy. And I look up to sort of see who this like person is, right? And there's this man who was kind of dressed in what I would describe as like Aztec or something kind of garb, very traditional. I mean, I don't even know that he was wearing a shirt, but he had some sort of he was in some sort of like traditional indigenous like ancient outfit, and he had like an attendant with him. And I mean, he was just walking through the crowd, but it was almost like he was floating. Like this guy was very clearly like into some sort of deep like energy work, right? And not the light kind. And I'm just like watching him go through the crowd, and I can just I had to almost like put my head down on the table. It was like how strong his force field was. And like to the point where I looked at my husband at the time and I was like, oh my God, like I don't know that I'll ever feel right again. Like that was how intense it was. And, I just had to kind of remind myself, I'm like, energy is infinite. It's okay. Like, you just need a minute. Like, it'll be fine. But, I share that to say, like, there are people who do intentionally go around this world trying to take energy from other people. And that guy was one of them. So for sure there are energy vampires, right? But like, there's also, there's a dark side and a light side. Right. I think we've all also, in addition to experiencing energy vampires, like we've all also been around people who light us up, who leave us feeling energized, who leave us feeling hopeful and expansive and just better. People who you're around them and you're like, man, like, I cannot wait to spend more time with you. How do I do that, please? I feel inspired now. And so it can be both. And, you know, like you might be asking, especially if this is a new concept for you, like you might be asking like, well, what's the difference? There's this idea that we all sort of have like our unique energy signatures, right? But I mean, I've also experienced in my own life that my energy has drastically changed over the course of my lifetime. And, you probably have too if you've been on your healing journey for any length of time. And so, what I've just noticed in myself and what I've noticed in people that I've known for quite a while, right? It's like, the energy that a person has, it's like a reflection of, their own relationship with with themselves. It's a reflection of whatever sort of unprocessed like emotions they might have in themselves. One of the reasons why narcissists kind of fall into that energy vampire category is because what's really going on for them is that they are holding so much grief, so much insecurity, so much trauma that they don't even begin to understand how to process, right? That they don't have room for anyone else's feelings. And so every situation has to be about them and their comfort and them getting their needs and their wants met, right? Which is why it's always imbalanced, your interactions with them. Something else that kind of impacts a person's energy is like their beliefs, their mindset, right? So if someone is sort of deep in this idea that's very pervasive in our culture that's like, I only have value insofar as I'm being productive, well, then that person's going to be really unsettled, right? And there's sort of a busyness that you see to people who are sort of like steeped in that belief system, which means that their energy is also going to feel unsettled. Those people kind of can have a hard time being still. And so, when you're around them, you might also have a hard time being still. And then another thing that impacts a person's energy is just their like, I don't want to say spiritual development, but just like their relationship to spirit, their relationship to their own self and their own soul. Right. And I think we're also just kind of seeing this on display like right now in like the collective is like if a person is like deeply disconnected with themselves and their own sort of spiritual dimension and their own like connection with source, that's going to show up in their energy. And it's going to show up in the way that they treat other people. Right. But for a person who is like deeply connected with spirit, with a person who sort of, yeah, just like is secure in their own connection with the divine, there is a groundedness to that person and a peace to that person. And you will feel that in their energy. This is one of the reasons why we feel attracted to people who have like gone deep into their spiritual paths is because we can feel that groundedness in them. We can feel that love energy in them. And it's attractive because it feels safe and familiar. you know, and oftentimes it's something that we hope to cultivate in ourselves, right? I mean, I for some reason, the walk for peace, if you guys were following that at all on Instagram, right? And just like seeing the throngs of people coming to catch a glimpse of these monks who were just embodying that energy of, of internal peace, of hope for the future, hope for mankind, a promise of, I think one of the things that these sort of like awakened beings like give to us, right, is this glimpse of what it could be, this glimpse of what a human could be, as opposed to like all of the sort of examples of humans, I'll say, that like we see on the news, for instance, right? Florida man. And there's something relieving about knowing that that kind of human exists. Oh, that's possible. Thank goodness. So these are the kinds of things that like impact a person's energy and impact how a person's energy feels to us, the people around them, right? And I if you haven't kind of tapped into this already, now that you've sort of we've talked about this, now that we've had this little conversation, like when you're out in the world, see if you can see it. One of my sort of favorite things to do is like observe how people react, like when I enter a room or when other people enter a room, like what happens? Right? Like see if you can if you can think about it like this, like imagine sort of like the different energetic ingredients that are like going on like in a crowded room, right? And like see if you can kind of like pinpoint like what everyone is bringing. It's kind of a fun little people watching sort of exercise, and for me, I mean, I recently had an experience in sort of like watching someone's kind of chaotic energy like throw off an entire room. Um, I couldn't help but interact with this person because they were the one behind the cash register at a restaurant. And I go up to order and had this like pretty brusque interaction with this person. And I kind of had a sense that it was going to be this way before I even went to go interact with them because I had sort of been observing and feeling out the room before that. But I got up there, it happened that way, and I was like, okay, right, I should have been prepared for this. Like I knew this was coming, but okay, whatever. Let's just roll with it. And then I go to like wait for my order and I'm just like watching. It's like this thing fell apart, this other thing fell apart. Like now they're kind of in a tiff with this other person, and like the whole kitchen staff was frankly stressed and feeling anxiety because this person's internal chaos was like infecting the whole team. I was there long enough that I actually also got to observe the manager pinpoint what was going on as well. And by the time I left, that person had been reassigned to, I mean, taking out the trash, actually. And I don't mean to laugh, but it's, the point is that, energy is catching. And I think particularly if we haven't been like plugged in to or sensitive to energy, it can be really easy for us to sort of discount that. But like, for instance, in this situation, like this person's energy not only impacted everyone else on their team, but it also impacted everyone else who walked through that restaurant that day. And if you think about it even further, I mean, everyone who interacted with that restaurant that day also got a little taste of that unsettled, chaotic energy and then walked out of that restaurant with that. So it also impacted everyone that they interacted with that day, right? And just imagine the knock-on effects of that. I nearly like left when I saw it because I was just like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. But because but I chose to sort of deal because I was like, I want to eat this food, and I'm aware of this enough that I can just sort of not be overly impacted by it. Observe, not don't absorb. But anyways. this brings me to my next point, which is that oftentimes when we talk about energy transfer, we're talking about it in the context of like a one-on-one interaction, or even an interaction where we're sort of allowing someone to touch us. I don't know, in this moment, like I'm having this memory of I was in a club and there was this guy who I just immediately got like a weird read on. And he effectively demanded that a friend of mine hug him. And she did, and whatever. And I just like noticed, I'm like observing this happen. And I noticed that as soon as she exited that interaction, she just kind of looked less well off. Like she just kind of slumped a little bit and honestly looked a little used. And he turns to me and he like tried to demand a hug from me. And I was just like, no. And he like pushed the situation, right? And like I wasn't trying to get into a conflict with this guy, but like for me internally, I was like, I just saw what happened there and I don't want any of that, right? You don't get to touch me. But, you know, the point is that yes, like those moments of one-on-one interactions or touching interactions are very acute moments when energy transfer happens, you know? And again, just to sort of put the emphasis a little bit on like light side. I mean, I've had hugs that like leave me glowing for days, you know, like that also happens. But like energy transfer also happens in sort of much larger contexts than that, right? Like remember this restaurant situation, like I didn't touch that person. There was a counter of like at least 4 feet deep in between us. And it was still like I was still impacted by her energy. You know, maybe to bring it into a context that might be more familiar for you. I mean, I think that we've all had experiences in workplaces with, I mean, I don't, this feels too judgy to me, but I'm still going to say it because it makes sense in this context. It's like, I think we've all had the boss or the manager who's a little toxic. That person's toxicity like impacts the culture of the workplace for everyone. You know, for instance, like if you have a boss who doesn't have good boundaries with themselves around work-life balance, they're also going to expect you to not have good boundaries around work-life balance, right? Which impacts your whole life. Or, you know, to talk about narcissists again, right? Like if you have a boss who is a narcissist and does not see it, right? That person's personality type is going to run the whole office or workplace. And not only that, it's going to also impact everyone doing business with you guys, right? Because when that person decides that they've been betrayed, when that person decides that they've been done wrong by someone, they're not going to take responsibility for that situation. They're going to put responsibility for it on anyone else that they can put it on, right? And that includes not paying their bills. That includes blaming other people for the quality of work. That includes throwing other people under the bus, right? And that behavior also creates an energetic environment that y'all have to just live in for as long as you choose to tolerate that work environment. If you've ever had if you've been in that job, you've in that sort of situation, you're familiar with the anxiety of it. Just to sort of acknowledge that there's light and dark to both, right? Like energy transfer is not always negative. For instance, like women learned that finding a boss who respects women, who has a strong mother figure, or, you know, maybe has like good relationships with their sisters or whatever, right? That those people cultivate a totally different sort of work environment than men who don't, right? It's a totally different energy. And It makes for a more tolerable work environment for women who are smart, successful, or strong women, bosses who have humility, bosses who are humble, as well as sort of who are also willing to take accountability, create a totally different work environment than bosses who shirk responsibility. Bosses who understand that we can all thrive and that things actually go better when we are all thriving, create a different work environment. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm actually just feeling it in my body right now, like talking about this versus sort of what we were the kinds of work environments we're talking about before, it just feels different on your body, right? If you've had experience with either of these, you can just remember, yeah, that did feel different. And that's just you tuning into the energy of that. What I want you to take away from the sort of conversation around workplaces, right, is that people don't leave their energy at the door when they go to work, particularly if they're in a management or a leadership position. If anything, what happens is that their energy gets amplified, right? This is particularly the case if they're in a high pressure position, right? Because we all know that people's true selves really comes out when they're pushed sort of to their capacity. It's you really get to sort of see where a person's triggers are when they're in high pressured situations, right? Or when a person is in a position of power over others, right? I get to make calls about your future. I get to evaluate you and decide whether you're doing a quote unquote good job according to me. You also see this when people are in charge of product development or service, right? You can tell so much about the leadership in an employment context or in a company based on the kinds of values that are embodied in the products and the services that they provide. And I think this particularly comes out in the case of customer service. How much does that person, how much does leadership at that company actually value the people that are purchasing their goods and services? How important do they think it is for those people to be satisfied and to feel taken care of? And if it's not important to them, what does that say? Those companies where there is no one to reach out to for help. The only one to reach out to for help anymore is an AI robot who, I mean, I don't know about you, but recently I was okay, I'm going to chat with this AI robot. I'm going to open myself to the possibility that this is going to be a productive conversation. And, I had the little exchange. It was no problem. I'm going to take care of that for you. Someone's going to reach out. This is what you're going to get. 2 weeks goes by, no one reached out. I finally went back and emailed them directly. And they were oh yeah, you can have this. It's a totally different thing. We have no record of your conversation with our AI chatbot. It just was really illuminating, As you consider the energy you're wanting to bring into your home and your field, here's some facts to consider about Amazon. Amazon was founded by Jeff Bezos in 1994 for the purpose of taking advantage of a loophole of not having to collect sales taxes for online sales. That loophole no longer exists, but Amazon continues to center its profit maximization strategy around avoiding taxes at various levels. In 2021, for instance, Amazon avoided paying approximately $5.2 $1.2 billion in corporate income tax in the US. Another aspect of Amazon's profit maximization strategy is paying its many warehouse workers as little as possible, while extracting as much labor from them as it can. Despite being a huge corporation whose CEO is one of the richest men in the world, Amazon ranks highly on the list of employers with huge numbers of warehouse employees receiving food stamp benefits. The average Amazon warehouse worker makes approximately $24,300 per year. Amazon's warehouse workers literally bear the burden of Amazon's relentless drive for profit. A 2020 report found that Amazon warehouse employees worked 55-hour weeks with 10-hour days on average, were expected to pack around 300 items per hour, which amounts to 5 items per minute, and were harassed, disciplined, or fired if they failed to meet their targets. Workers report that they feel unable to take bathroom breaks and sometimes resort to urinating in bottles. And the bodies of Amazon's warehouse workers tell the tale of this inhumane and impossible work environment. In 2024, Amazon employed 39% of U.S. warehouse workers, but accounted for 56% of all serious injuries in the industry. Numerous ambulance calls are made to Amazon warehouses, with common issues cited including difficulty breathing, chest pains, cardiac problems, spells of unconsciousness, and other undefined illnesses. But Amazon's abuse of its employees isn't limited to low-wage warehouse workers. Its white-collar workers, often speaking anonymously for fear of retaliation, report a toxic work environment, including unreasonably high standards, ridiculous working hours, and extreme workloads. Workers are encouraged to tear apart each other's ideas in meetings and send secret feedback to each other's bosses, which tactic is often used to sabotage others. Employees returning to work from personal crises such as cancer treatment, serious surgeries, and miscarriages report being unfairly evaluated, being put on performance improvement plans, subjected to monitoring, and ultimately being edged out of their jobs. The Guardian has also reported that teenagers recruited to work in Amazon factories in China are subject to forced labor, which is a modern form of slavery where people are forced to work against their will out of fear they'll be punished or harmed. Amazon's toxicity extends to the actual environment as well. In 2020, Amazon reported its emissions at 44.4 million tons of CO2 per year, which is the equivalent to about 55.5 million passenger flights from London to New York every single year. Note that this number does not include the supply chain for its goods, which in Amazon's case is likely to represent over 75% of its total footprint. Amazon is also supporting our continued dependence on fossil fuels. For instance, Amazon offered special technology services such as machine learning and AI technologies to companies like Shell and BP to assist with fossil fuel extraction. And Amazon was a sponsor of a 2020 event held by the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is a think tank well known for spreading climate denial misinformation. As well, Amazon is assisting with the mass surveillance, domestic terrorism, and illegal deportations by ICE and this administration. After purchasing Ring in 2018, Amazon integrated Ring into nearly 1,400 police departments across the country, providing them with an easy way to request and store footage from thousands of residents at a time, allowing for massive warrantless surveillance. This information can then be shared with ICE and the FBI. Amazon also has contracts with the Department of Homeland Security, which enables ICE to track down, harass, and illegally detain and deport individuals in the U.S. Finally, Amazon is also assisting Israel's genocide in Gaza. Amazon provides the Israeli military with a server farm, which is used to store massive amounts of surveillance and unlawful data collection on Palestinians that Israel uses in its military actions there. Amazon's business model is based on hooking you with its convenience and then making it feel almost impossible to let go. The success of Amazon's combination of convenience and low prices works because people feel they lack income and are short on time outside of work. Another way to say this is that Amazon is so successful because it benefits off of the US's system of wage slavery. But it's not impossible to extract ourselves from Amazon's grip and to stop giving our life force and our dollars to supporting a company built on tax avoidance, severe mistreatment of its workers, abuse of the environment, mass surveillance, and military violence. And perhaps more importantly, it's not impossible to stop letting this toxic energy into our lives in the form of its goods and services. I know because I've done it, and it feels so good to have this energy out of my life. So if you're ready to start opting out of supporting Amazon and its activities, here's a list of Amazon-owned companies that you may also be supporting. Whole Foods Market, Zappos, Twitch, Audible, Goodreads, Ring, and Abe Books. Tell your friends. All right, New Humans fam, let's get back into the episode. Okay, so we've talked about energy transfer through touch. We've talked about it through one-on-one interactions. We've even talked about it in terms of proximity, right? This is being in the crowded room, noticing that someone's energy is impacting you, right? We've talked about it in terms as well of just organizations, right? I, as an employee, might be impacted by the energy of my boss. But it goes beyond that, because remember, everything is energy. So everything can be impacted by energy. Objects carry energy. And in the spiritual community, it's very sort of commonplace to sort of understand that things like crystals, for instance, carry energy, right? You can charge a crystal, or if it's a crystal that you use for like healing purposes, you'll want to like cleanse it in between using it on different people, right? Very commonplace. Same kind of concept when it comes to smudging a room, right? So whether that be a room in your home, whether it be, a new office, right? Maybe you've changed offices and you're like, oh, I don't know, it feels a little weird in here. Like, let me smudge this, right? Maybe you're in a hotel room and you have no idea who's been hanging out in there and you smudge that, right? Like, these are all sort of practices that I think are more and more becoming mainstream. And the concept underlying it is just that what we call inanimate objects, right, and spaces can also just carry energy. And it extends beyond crystals. One of the things that I had to sort of become more aware of when I was learning how to take care of myself as an empath was, whether the objects I was surrounding myself were actually bringing me joy and peace. An example that's kind of coming to mind is like, you might have an object in your house that maybe has some like sentimental value to you, but actually it doesn't bring you joy and peace, right? I'm thinking of like a gift from an ex that maybe that relationship was actually really tumultuous. The breakup was actually like really incredibly difficult, and looking at that, it's like, yeah, there's some nostalgia there, but it also brings up all of that hurt and all of that tumult. Is that a word? I don't know. These are questions to ask ourselves. And something that's coming to mind is this book by Marie Kondo, and it was a TV show as well, but it was called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And one of the pieces of advice, like the core pieces of advice in that book, was take all of the objects in your home, get in your hands, and sort of ask yourself, like, does this bring me joy? And if the answer is no, get rid of it, because your home is your sanctuary. This is the energy that you're surrounding yourself with day in and day out. And if it's filled with objects that are not bringing you peace and joy, then you're like self-sabotaging on a sense. And for me as an empath, I mean, I had to go even further beyond this, right? Like something that I came across was this idea that like too much text, too much branding can actually like be really exhausting because it's like additional information that you're sort of, whether consciously or not, like processing. The idea is that you are already processing so much information as an empath that like the whatever you can do to sort of reduce the noise, if you will, in your living space, like will just serve you. So, for instance, one of the things that I've done is like I've gone through and gotten rid of all of the branded stuff in my house. Like there just isn't branding. And I'll say it feels real nice. So if you haven't come across the work of Marie Kondo before and you haven't sort of just looked around your home and asked yourself like, do these objects bring me peace and joy? That might be something to do. And as you do that, it might be really interesting to sort of ask yourself, like, are there any patterns that I'm coming across? And, I think sort of the big takeaway there is just that, like, as we become more and more aware of ourselves, conscious of ourselves as energetic beings who get impacted by the energy that surrounds us, it's really important to exercise good energetic hygiene. It's really important to like be conscious of the energy that we are bringing into our field. And that includes our homes, right? It's not just about getting touched. It's about what we're allowing to surround ourselves with, what we are surrounding ourselves with, right? And again, you can kind of think about it in terms of the crystals, right? Like one of the reasons why people love having crystals in their homes is because they bring a particular energy, right? They have particular energetic properties and it can kind of I don't know, kind of bring like a vibrancy, it's very similar to why people might have plants in their house, for instance, right? There's a vibrancy to it. Same thing with other objects. And if you haven't started thinking about the objects in your home this way, start doing it. And here's why. So what does energy transfer, energetic hygiene have to do with the choices that we make in terms of what products and services that we consume? Everything. It has everything to do with that. Because what you're doing when you choose to support a business with your dollars, when you choose to buy a product or a service from a company, when you choose to bring that product or service into your home, is you are saying yes to that company's energy. And more importantly, perhaps than that, is you are saying, I will give you some of my life force in the form of dollars in exchange for the privilege of having your energy in my energetic field, aka my home, aka my life. What that means is that if that product or service was created by a company run by individuals with energy that is not compatible with yours, energy that is chaotic, energy that is anxiety ridden, and energy that is extractive, what you are doing is you are nonetheless bringing all of that energy into your home in the form of that product or service. This is just coming up for me in the moment, so I'll just share that like I until recently had Xfinity Wi-Fi because that was sort of all my building was wired up for, and like despite really disliking Xfinity, I was like, okay, fine. Like, I don't seem to have any other choice here. But a few months ago, I became aware of a different service, which I'm not gonna name because I don't necessarily need to support them. But the point is that because Xfinity had sort of had contracts with ICE, I was like more motivated to switch away from them. And literally the second that I ended that contract with Xfinity, I just felt a little nicer in my house somehow. Like the energy just shifted just a little bit. And I really do attribute that to like not having the energy of a company that's willing to support the activities that ICE is engaging in and the activities of this administration flowing into my house. So, in that moment, when we're evaluating whether to buy a particular product or service, we are all so practiced at asking ourselves, like, does this product or service meet my needs and expectations? Is it convenient for me to buy this product or service? And, does this price match what I'm willing to pay for this product or service, right? Like, we do that stuff in our sleep, right? Thank you, capitalism. What I want to suggest to you is that in addition to that, you do a vibe check. Ask yourself, is the energy of this company something that I want to bring into my home and my life? And like go beyond the branding, right? Like we all know at this point, like in this world of drop shipping and white labeling, that like branding is just words on packaging. Like there are companies that will say whatever it is that they can get away with in order to maintain their image in the eyes of the consumer, in order to maintain sort of the story of their company, because that's what they know people want to hear and not because it's the reality, right? We know that. So, I mean, I don't want to like add stuff to your to-do list, but a good sort of way to cut through some of that, right, is like ask yourself about the person running that company or the people who were in charge of running that company. Like, would I want to invite them to a party? Would I want to have dinner with that person? And I think that'll really help you kind of cut through some of this, like some of the details, of like, is this actually a good company or not? Like, am I into that person? Do I feel good about them and like what they stand for? Do I like the kind of contribution that they're making to the community? You know? Do I feel attracted to them as a person? And that'll tell you everything because, we're so used to like, the pro cons list and the rational mind and data and research and but like our bodies know the answer. And again, if you're just waking up and just tuning into this, like you might have to do a little bit of practice and frankly just take a little bit of faith. But like know that you can get a really accurate read on someone and their energy instantaneously. You just have to practice and trust it. And so if your answer to any of those questions is no, then you probably also do not want that product in your house. Because remember, that product, that service, whatever it is imbued with the energy, the values of that person, of those people. And by bringing it into your house and your life, you are bringing that energy into your field and it will impact you. Here's something else I want you to think about. In the capitalist worldview that we have all been living in and still are to a large extent, right? Energy is zero sum. It might be easier to think about this in terms of dollars, right? So if you have a dollar, I do not have that dollar. And this sort of zero sum like conception of energy under the capitalist worldview is what motivates and leads to a lot of the very destructive and frankly like inhumane sort of behaviors that we see in particularly mega corporations. For instance, the desire to pay workers as little as possible. Because if I give my workers more money for the work that they do, I do not then have that money. And my goal, of course, is to increase the amount of money that I have, right? That's the profit motive, right? Same thing, giving them health benefits. Same thing, giving them a comfortable work environment. If I invest the money in that, then I do not then have that money. It's this desire to extract value that leads to so many of our practices that are harmful to the environment. It's cheaper to do it that way because if I spend the dollar to do it a different way, then I no longer have that dollar. And it's the same thing that incentivizes companies to make products as cheaply as possible, even if, or maybe even because that means that they will break and be disposed of faster. Because that means that you will then buy more, which means that the company will then have more dollars. I mean, all of this, right? All of these sort of destructive tendencies that come out of this zero-sum conception of energy are so on display right now. And I think one of the reasons that this is like coming to the surface is because one of the things that we are maybe stepping into, I hope, is understanding that energy is actually additive or can be. And I mean, I think I'm not going to go here today, but I actually think that, pushing beyond that is actually like energy is actually infinite. Right? We've just been living in this system of manufactured scarcity because that's built into the capitalist worldview. But it's the kind of thing that we've been talking about in terms of positive energy transfer. If I give good energy, if I let people feel taken care of and safe, if I meet their needs in a moment, then all the energy rises. Everyone benefits. If I take care of the planet, everyone benefits. And there are companies that exist now who are led by people who understand that, who understand that it is better for everyone if they make a better quality product, even if it is more expensive for them. There are companies that understand that we all benefit from them prioritizing reducing their negative impact on the planet. And the energy of the products and the services that are created by companies like that is different. And it will feel different in your field. And I'd like to invite you just to check in with your heart right now. How does it feel? Hearing about people and even just the concept that it doesn't have to be zero sum. It can be additive. It can be that we can all thrive together. It can be that we can live and move through this world with the understanding and the motivation that if we take care of each other, we all benefit. Feels good to me. Maybe in addition to going through your home, checking out your items that you have. Does this bring me peace? Does this bring me joy? If not, can I find a theme? Is it maybe items that I bought from a certain kind of retailer or items that remind me, whatever it is, whatever the theme is, right? And then when you sort of go through your day making further consumption choices, you might ask yourself, how do I feel about this company? Do I want to bring this energy into my field? I've gotten to a place where I can actually just sense that from a website. And sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes it shows up and I'm like, man, that was some really good photography. That was some really good branding, right? But then I know that and I don't make that choice again. And we can just start to tune into that and realize that it serves us individually to be aware of the energy that we are allowing into our fields, because everything is energy, including us. And we are impacted by the energy that we allow to surround us. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the New Humans for New Earth podcast. I hope as you sort of go through your day, make your consumption choices, you feel inspired to ask yourself about this sort of energetic aspect. If you've been on your journey for any length of time, I know that you've likely been cultivating your own energy. And, we can expand that into cultivating the energy in our field, right? What we say yes to, what we allow in. And, turns out probably, I think, I think it's likely that that means that we will also then be almost like intuitively guided to support companies that are more in line with our values and to remove our support from companies that aren't, and wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? So, if this episode left you feeling inspired, motivated, excited to sort of make more choices that are in alignment, thank you for sharing it to your social media and tagging us. Thank you for sharing it with your friends, your partner, a family member, or anyone that you love. And if you loved this episode, thank you for leaving a review. And be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. This is how we grow the New Humans community and help inspire others to join us in co-creating New Earth. This world is what we make it. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.